Okay, this video is The Story of Philosophy. It's a book review based on this book by Will Durant. On this page here, I just got a bunch of history books that if you're interested in learning history, the best one is Arthur Herman's The Cave in the Light. It's by far the best. It's available in audiobook, paperback. It's great. It's a masterpiece. Okay, famous Greeks. This guy, Rufus Fears, best teacher ever from the Teaching Company. And he did famous Greeks, famous Romans, greatest books of all time. What can we learn from the great books? What can we learn from the myths? Okay, he's great. Anything he does, you're going to like it. The guy's brilliant and he's funny. He's nice. Edith Hamilton, she's great. She writes especially about the Greeks and the Romans. And she became an honorary citizen of Athens. The Greeks were so in love with the things that she wrote. Okay, The Great Ideas of Philosophy, another course from the great courses here. Daniel Robinson, he's got a good attitude. He's real positive and upbeat, and he sort of celebrates some of the high points in Western philosophy, so I like him. From Dawn to Decadence by Jacques Berzon. A little bit awkward at times, but also kind of brilliant, so that was a good book. That's especially the history of the last 500 years. And now we come to Will Durant's book, The Story of Philosophy. Will Durant was an American. He initially, his parents were sort of French-Canadian Catholics. He initially studied for the priesthood, then decided not to go down that path. He's a very hard-working guy. I think his heart's in the right place. I think he's a little bit of a lightweight. He spends way too much time on crappy philosophers, not enough on the great philosophers. But it's a decent history, okay? And then here's just another one of the famous histories. Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, and this is the worst one. Bertrand Russell, even though he was a brilliant guy, he's sort of a pain in the ass. He's sort of grouchy and cynical, and he's an atheist, and he just sort of ruins the book, okay? But I say this because I've read tons of history and tons of philosophy, and for a person who wants to start studying, all these books are in order from best to worst, and these are like a lot of the most famous philosophy history books. If you're curious about that. Oops, I got to get to the next slide here. How do I get to the next slide? Try this one. All right. Oops, shoot, that's not it. Ooh, sorry, I'm having a hard time getting to the next slide. There we go. All right, so actually I just skipped by all the authors here. I meant to say, anyways, we'll start with Spinoza. Spinoza was a Portuguese philosopher who lived in Amsterdam. He got excommunicated for atheism, and he was kind of a lonely guy. And you're going to see lots of these philosophers are lonely guys. And that's because the lonely guy's got time to think and read. When you are busy providing for a family like a chump over here, no, don't get me wrong, my family brought me a lot of happiness. You don't have as much time to write books and to think. The other thing, too, is you got to have some money because most men, they're stuck working all the time trying to provide for their families, so they don't ever have any time to do any philosophy or thinking. But ideal thing, I mean, I regret I didn't focus more on making money when I was younger. I liked the idea of, like Ben Franklin, by 38, he was rich enough he could then just do whatever he wanted afterwards. That's a smart move. Okay, some quotes by Baruch Spinoza. Academies are founded at the public expense. They are put there to restrain men, not to develop them. And yeah, that's the joke, is that a university is a place where you go to get a degree. It's not a place where you go to learn. You know, it's very much like this, and it's not going to let you learn that much. Okay, Baruch Spinoza, the proper study of a wise man is how to live. Okay, well, that sounds nice, but that's really basically Socrates. Socrates said the exact same thing. Come on, give me a break. But still, he makes the point. Let's learn what is good for us versus what is bad for us. And again, that's really Socrates talking there, okay? Spinoza's next quote, the more intelligible you can make a thing, the easier it is to remember. Yeah, as soon as you find something you want to remember, start talking about it. What is it like? What is it not like? Then talk about it with a friend. You remember. Make a note. Okay, the two big motivations in life are hope and fear. We go towards that which gives us hope, and we move away from that which gives us fear. Pretty accurate. Spinoza says, reason cannot defeat emotion. An emotion can only be displaced or overcome by a stronger emotion. Yep. When somebody's got that emotional slogan in their mind, good fats, it's hard to talk sense into them. Okay, the highest activity is learning for understanding. Yeah, and that's why the public schools stink. Even though there's a lot of really good teachers, it's the same thing in med school. The teaching is based on memorization rather than understanding. Understanding stays with you forever. Memorization is usually a short-term thing that you forget after the test, whereas understanding, you remember for life. You remember how to drive a car from driver's ed, how to talk to a girl, that kind of stuff. Okay, Baruch Spinoza. To become what we are capable of becoming is the goal of life. Yeah, and that's like James Watson when he said an animal's happy when it does what it's designed to do. A horse is happy when it runs. If you feel it's your destiny to do something, when you're doing that activity, you'll be happy. Spinoza continues, those who want the future to be different from the past must study the past. Yeah, basically, you got no history, you're an ignoramus. So it's kind of like the Cicero quote, to not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child. Okay. Okay, now a little bit of Plato. Okay, he really didn't talk much about Socrates. He talked more about Plato. So here's Plato's wonderful allegory of the cave, and basically most persons are sort of clueless normies, and they just listen to the stories told by those who tell the stories, so to speak, and it's just sort of a manufactured truth, a manufactured worldview, and then the one who's able to escape from the cave becomes a real philosopher and can see absolute truth, objective truth, the real sunshine. And in Plato's example, this would be Socrates. And that's one of the things that freaked out Plato and made him very sad, that Socrates was the best man in Athens, yet he was killed. Okay, so Plato sort of felt, well, how could a philosopher or a scholar handle himself in Athens? A lot of this came because it was after the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens had lost. And Sparta then had a lot of influence in who was controlling Athens, and they didn't like Socrates, and they felt he had corrupted the youth with some of his philosophy, for example, disrespected the gods. Okay, but be that as it may, this is a great allegory, the allegory of the cave, and it's highly applicable to modern times as well. And the one who goes out of the cave is supposed to go back down and try to help the others, even though that's not easy to do, and often they get mad at him, as they did at Socrates in a sense. That's what Plato was sort of saying. Okay, in that book I mentioned earlier by Arthur Herman, it starts from that story, from that allegory. Okay, a couple quick quotes here. Ashley Brilliant, life is the only game where the object of the game is to figure out the rules. Voltaire, it is difficult to free a man from the chains he loves. Goethe, none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free. The truth has been kept from their minds by the masters who rule them with lies. They feed them on falsehoods until wrong looks right in their eyes. That's pretty common. Plato then says, no one is more hated than he who tells the truth. Yeah, and that's been my experience, is that if you talk about something that's not desired by the higher-ups for you to talk about, it doesn't get that many views. And just like my last couple of videos on this thing. That's okay, but my job is, as the bad boy of veganism, is to tell people the truth about stuff, to educate them, to be a lighthouse where smart people can find useful information. So be it. I'll never get a lot of views, but I think I'll try to make good videos for you. Okay, this is another one quote here now. Truth is only for the small minority who are trained in the dialectic, ready and willing to climb out of the cave. And so that's Plato speaking, and this was described in Arthur Herman's book. Also, one must exit the cave alone. Yeah, it's a lonely business because most people, they just don't have that much curiosity. Just like they're herbivores for diet, they're sort of herbivore mentality. Safe places in the middle of the pack. Not that curious, okay? All right, any other good stuff here? Just a little bit of historical people who can be seen as the light in the cave. You know, the people like Socrates, Prometheus, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Cicero, Jesus Christus, Boethius, Newton, Ruskin, Ayn Rand, Solzhenitsyn. Okay, and Coulter. Okay, anyways. A little bit on Socrates now. So I'm sort of going like the order of the book. Socrates, what did he say? Socrates is just good common sense. The highest wisdom is distinguishing good from bad. Yeah, what's good food for you and what's bad for you. Principles of philosophy is determining how we ought to live, like I was referring to earlier that he said that. In order to decide how to live well, we should learn what is good for us and what is bad for us. Yeah, it's simple, but that's the truth. What foods are good? What toxins should be avoided? It's pretty basic. Okay, Socrates, marry or marry not. In either case, you will regret it. If you get a good wife, you'll be happy. If you get a bad one, you'll become a philosopher. I like the line by Rodney Dangerfield. He says, what's the difference between marrying in an arranged marriage versus marrying for love? He says, you can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself. Okay, and then he says, the fastest path to glory is to strive to become what you wish to be. And so in that sense, that means basically, if you feel something is right for you in your destiny, you'll pursue it with more energy and you'll get better at it faster. Kind of like the Goethe quote: to learn a complex thing well, a man must love it, because it gives you the energy to really study it. To do good to others benefits our souls. Yeah, it's like that's a little bit of almost like predicting Jesus Christu there. This idea of being kind to others also enriches us. And, a little bit like the golden rule. The variation of the golden rule is not so much treat others as you would want to be treated, but it's rather treat others as they want to be treated. I think it's an important little tip on the golden rule there. Socrates: when the debate is lost, slander becomes a tool of the user. Yeah, everybody sees that, ad hominem. So basically, that's what they always do to a smart, competent person. If a person's stupid, they just go, that guy's stupid, okay? But when a person is intelligent and has a reasonable argument, they go, oh, well, that person's a jerk, or they throw some other label on him. Okay, the courtroom questioner said to Socrates, aren't you ashamed of going around and behaving in a way such that everyone in Athens hates you? And Socrates said, no, I am on a mission from God to follow the truth wherever it leads. I would be ashamed of myself if I didn't do this. So Socrates is like the saint of philosophy. All right. Now what we got here is a little more. These are critics of Socrates. Not everybody loves Socrates. This is Robert Piercing's great book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. He sort of felt that Socrates and Plato were playing games that they accused the sophists of doing. They would use persuasive language with an emotional bent to it to make the weaker argument, their point of view, appear stronger than the point of view of the sophists. And so Piercing says Socrates is not using dialectic to understand rhetoric. He's using it to destroy it, or at least put it in disrepute. And so his questions are not real questions at all. They're just word traps for Gorgias and his fellow rhetoricians to fall into. Okay, that's good stuff. That's a great book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I really enjoy that. Then there's the whole Walter Fisher paradigm of whoever tells a good story that's more important than the logic. Okay, I'm just showing a couple high points. This is not all from the book itself. I've given previous lectures on all these philosophers, so I just threw my slides together. I'll give you a couple high points from them. I love Plato's writing style. Basically, Plato was a disappointed politician. He was a disappointed playwright. But as a philosopher, he took what he had learned about writing plays and he made a conversational format with the dialogues between Socrates, like the intellectual hero of his writings, with young men that were his students, and it created a very enjoyable format, the dialectic format of conversation, and like writing a play, and it's very enjoyable. Esoteric writing is writing used to mask one's real feelings with insider jokes, and it's understandable only to a select audience. It can be really detailed and difficult to read. So there's some of that in Plato, but then there's also so-called exoteric writing, to speak openly, and that's understandable by the masses. Okay, and there's both in the writing, and it's good to have both. Okay, so the Socratic discussion, what I like about it is it lets you have contrasting opinions, and that way you can see all the different sides of an issue. Okay. Plato talking about how difficult it is, and like this is Socrates, of course. If anyone tried to release the people, the normies, and lead them up out of the cave, the rulers would try to kill them. And the bitter truth is that most people prefer to live in the cave. They get upset, even furious, when someone challenges their fondest illusions. Yep, like Voltaire said, it's difficult to free a fool from their chains. Okay, Plato also, he was so sad that Athens had lost to Sparta that he sort of had more respect for Sparta's way of doing things than he should have. And Sparta was kind of collectivist. And so he sort of promoted this collectivist mentality whereby he felt Athens should be run by philosopher kings, and that they should not even know who their children are, and that you should do eugenics for breeding and only breed the best with the best. That works better for animals. Why shouldn't that work better for humans? Okay, Plato's other quotes: the noblest of all studies is the study of what man is and what his life should be and how he should live. Yep, kind of an echo of Socrates, but of course it makes sense. That's exactly what we should study. All right, just like if you're studying medical stuff, you should study what causes disease, but they don't study that in medical school. Okay, Plato: a nation cannot be strong unless it believes in the gods. Yep. All right, Plato: when someone speaks ill of you, live so that no one will believe them. Okay, Plato on students: knowledge which is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold on the mind. Yeah, an aristocratic student who wanted to learn, they would ask Plato to take them as a student. They would want to learn. They're there because they want to be, and that leads to fast learning. Plato was a pretty athletic guy, and here's one thing he said. He who is only an athlete is too crude, too vulgar, too much a savage. He who is a scholar only is too soft, too effeminate. The ideal citizen is the scholar athlete, the man of thought and the man of action. All right, Plato. All right, Plato then says, the beginning is the most important part of a work. Yeah, so many times you look at a book and the beginning is kind of lame. A good writer makes the beginning one of the best parts. Plato, the people have no understanding and they only repeat what their rulers are pleased to tell them. So yeah, Plato was, you got to remember, his greatest hero in his whole life, the greatest man he'd ever met was Socrates. And then he sees Socrates be destroyed and killed by, the rabble of his society. And that sort of broke his heart. And, it was like PTSD, shock for him. Plato, those who tell the stories rule society. Yep, they shape public opinion. That's why it's a big deal. Plato from the Republic. The first thing we will establish is a censorship of the writers of fiction. And let the censors receive any tale of fiction which is good, but reject the bad ones. And we will desire mothers and nurses to tell their children the authorized versions only. So this is why a lot of people didn't like Plato so much. And me too. I don't like Plato that much. I like Aristotle this much. He's the absolute best. Then Socrates, then Plato. Even though Plato was a genius and his writing, his Republic and whatnot is entertaining, he pushed too hard for this collective stuff. And he says, well, this collectivism stuff is only for the leaders of the society, for the higher up aristocrats like the philosopher kings of the society. And of course, he wants a philosopher to be king because he's a philosopher. And it's a lot like Percy Bysshe Shelley said, poets should rule society. So everybody thinks whatever they do is more important than everything else. That's kind of human nature. He had noticed that in forms of leadership, democracy passes into despotism. When a tyrant first appears, they always declare that they're the protector. Okay. All right, now we're getting to Aristotle. And Aristotle's the best. Ayn Rand loves him, and rightfully so. She says, everything that makes us civilized human beings, every rational value that we possess, is the result of Aristotle's influence. Aristotle may be regarded as the cultural barometer of Western history. Whenever his influence dominated the scene, it paved the way for one of history's brilliant eras. Whenever it fell, so did mankind. So examples of that would be Aristotle, his inspiration of Aquinas and the syncretism, whereby ideas of Christianity were combined with Aristotelianism. That's what opened up the mind of Italy and Europe that brought in the Renaissance. Okay, it was a wonderful age. And Ayn Rand had also said that Aristotle is like Atlas, who held the whole world on his shoulders. He is sort of like the greatest genius of all time that gave mankind a sense of what was possible for them, how they could learn and know. Plato was also in awe of Aristotle's intelligence. He said Aristotle is intelligence personified. Aristotle had this giant library, like bigger than anyone else in the world at that time, and he did a lot of things that were unique and new to the world. He classified all the known information of the world at that time, sort of like making his own version of the encyclopedia. And it would include rhetoric, logic, biology, philosophy, etc., literature. And it has been said that what the Bible was to theology, Aristotle was that to philosophy and other topics. Okay, Aristotle, just some basic quotes by him. All men by nature desire to know. To facilitate rational thought, we must learn to control our emotions. The first step to an intelligent conversation is to remove our emotions. We must study excellence to help us be excellent. Okay? Yeah, nowadays you hear only excellence in a bogus way. You should hear the word meritocracy. If you have a sport and you want your team to win, you pick the best athletes. You should do the same if you want the best scholars to give you the best achievement or the best scientists. That's what you want. But you also need ethics too, so that they tell the truth. Okay, Aristotle. The highest activity of man is the pursuit of the truth. All right, Aristotle. And he says, the life of the intellect is the most pleasant and the best life, because the intellect is that which is unique about man. The pleasure of contemplation of truth is continuous and enduring. It does not wax and wane like the other pleasures. So learning is the greatest pleasure of all. And he says, of all men, the philosopher is the most godlike. Therefore, philosophers are the best men, because learning is the thing that is most like the gods, that capacity of us compared to the other humans. All right, Aristotle. All learning begins with imitation. All right. That which we learn by doing. One learns to play the harp by playing the harp. Intelligence is more than the knowledge of a task. Intelligence is also the ability to perform the task. A shipbuilder builds ships. The proof that you know something is that you could teach it. There's only one way to avoid criticism: to do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. Courage is the first of human qualities because it is the quality which guarantees the others. The high-minded man must care more for the truth than for what other people think. When we think, we speculate in pictures. You know, your dog can think. It doesn't have any words, so we probably think the same way, and then later we secondarily articulate it into words. Okay. There are no prudent young people. Prudence is concerned with specifics as well as universals. Specifics become known from experience, but young people lack experience. Okay, so that's one thing. The old man knows more than the young guy, but the young guy's got higher testosterone. He's stronger. Okay, so that's why if you got teenage son, they walk around the kitchen thinking they're all powerful. Okay, the family is the association established by nature for the supply of man's everyday needs. Okay, I think that's a good quote. Basically, it's a family that brings happiness to people, and how a person satisfies their needs. Education is the best provision for old age. Yeah, you not only get protection from the so-called cognitive reserve theory, it also gives you something to do, to enjoy reading, okay? It's cheap to just sit in a room and read. I am quite happy to just have a book and read, okay? I don't need all the fancy things that my family needs to keep me working, so I have to give them money. All right, the intellect is the most divine thing about us. To strive and improve the intellect is the most noble thing that we can do. The philosopher who strives to optimize the intellect does a great thing and is as close to the divine as possible. What a great attitude. So there it is. The smartest man in all of Greece puts the emphasis on learning. And actually, he was a Macedonian, and the Athenians actually kind of resented him. And he was friends with Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, he sort of got chased out of Athens. Okay, Aristotle, if you would understand anything, observe its beginning and its development. See how it is made. The greatest thing is to be a master of metaphor. It is the mark of genius to make good metaphors. It is the one thing that cannot be learned from others, because to be good with metaphors indicates a deep understanding of the likeness of things. Ordinary words convey only that which we already know. It is from metaphor that we can best get hold of something new. Yeah, the metaphor is really powerful. I've heard other people say it's the most unique thing about the human mind. Aristotle, in order to solve a problem, you first have to know what the problem really is, in the same way that you can't untie a knot until you've found the knot. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Yeah, a lot of people, you can't discuss anything with them because they take it so personal that, you're talking about obesity, they think you're calling them fat, and so the conversation ends right there rather than going through all the things that cause obesity so they can learn how to avoid them. Teaching is the highest form of understanding, says Aristotle. Okay, and then here's a quote I love from Aristotle, is that poetry, which he means also stories and literature, is more worthy of serious attention than is history. History treats particular facts. Poetry is concerned with universal truth. History only tells us what has been. Poetry tells us how things ought to be. Yeah, it inspires a man. Oops, I turned myself upside down. How did I do that? There we go. All right, and Ayn Rand had pointed out that quote. That's where I learned it from her when I was reading her about him. And that's true. It gives a person an intellectual lifeline of what to aspire to. Okay? The best communities are formed where the middle class is the largest group. Where there is no middle class and the poor greatly exceed in number, troubles arise and the country soon comes to an end. Oh, gee, that's great that we have more people in poverty now than ever before. Okay, Aristotle continues. The tyrant, in order to hold on to his power, suppresses every superiority, does away with good men, forbids education and light, controls every movement of the citizens, and keeps them under perpetual servitude. Aristotle says he wants them to grow accustomed to baseness and cowardice. He has spies everywhere to listen to what is said in meetings, and he spreads dissension and calumny among the citizens and impoverishes them, and is obliged to stir up conflicts to keep his subjects occupied and impose on them a permanent need of a demagogue. And that's Aristotle. So what a genius that guy was. He figured out all these things so long ago. All right, I won't go into this much, but this is just Aristotle on how you give a good speech. Logos, ethos, telos, pathos, and kairos. All right. So if you want, you can read it there. I've talked about that in previous lectures. Okay, now Voltaire. And so Voltaire, I really think he was quite funny, and he was entertaining, and he was a great writer, but he's also kind of a jerk. He's part of the philosophes, the atheists who sort of destroyed religion and tradition in France. Will Durant just loves him. He says that Voltaire was the most brilliant writer who ever lived. Things came to him dull and he made them radiant. Things came to him obscure and he made them clear. Okay, there are some funny things Voltaire says. He says, all that love ever brought me was 20 kicks in the ass, okay, from his book Candide. One should always aim at being interesting rather than exact. Exaggeration is the inseparable companion of greatness. My motto is to the point. All styles of writing are good except the boring kind. It is not enough to see and to know the beauty of a work. We must feel it and be affected by it. Woe to the author determined to teach. The best way to be boring is to leave nothing out. The secret of being a bore is to tell everything. So Voltaire was a great writer, and he wrote some famous plays, and he wrote lots of letters, and he's a very clever fellow. I do not agree with the words that you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say them. The right to free speech is more important than the content of speech. So all that is good. He did do some good things. And it's hard not to like him on the one hand, but on the other hand, man, was he a troublemaker. And he helped to destroy France. Okay, it was Voltaire's behavior and his thoughts and ideas, conjoined with Rousseau that led to the French Revolution, 1789, and the disaster of what happened to France. Great men have been formed either before academies or independent of them. Love truth but pardon error. It is better to risk saving a guilty man than to risk condemning an innocent one. Our species is so made and so wretched that those who walk on the well-trodden path always throw stones at those who are showing a new road. The true character of liberty is independence maintained by force. Great men have it is dangerous to be right when the established are wrong. Yes. To announce truth is an infallible method for being persecuted. Uh-oh. That's what I'm doing. Uh-oh. I'm very fond of the truth, but I'm not at all fond of martyrdom. Yeah, I agree with that one. To learn who rules you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize. Voltaire. To succeed in chaining the multitude, you must seem to wear the same fetters. Voltaire continues, those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Yeah, that's what's done to all the stupid people, is they get them to believe absurdities and then they behave very badly and they actually think their behavior is good, but it's evil. Okay, cultivate your own garden. That comes from the ending of Candide. Basically, just do the best you can with the people around you, to be good and be nice and make things better for you, and hopefully it'll ripple outward and everyone's better off. The more often a stupidity is repeated, the more it gets the appearance of wisdom. Common sense is not so common. Skepticism is the foundation of all wisdom. Yeah, you shouldn't believe stuff you hear. A lot of people, they believe anything they hear from a so-called expert or a regulatory agency. Most regulatory agencies are all fake. They're all paid off. Okay, perfect is the enemy of good. Yep, that's an important one for surgeons to know, for anyone to know. Think how difficult it is to change yourself, and you will realize how much more difficult it is to change someone else. The only reward to be expected from literature is contempt if one fails and hatred if one succeeds. Yeah, being a writer can be overrated, but it's also fun. The art of medicine consists of amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. Yep. Okay, who is the greatest man? Caesar, Alexander, or Cromwell? No, it was Newton, for he masters our minds by the force of truth, and is that to which we owe him reverence, not by those who enslave us with violence. Okay. Oh, yeah. And by the way, Cromwell's the biggest jerk. I'm part Irish, man. Anybody who's Irish don't like Cromwell. Okay. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with Voltaire. Like I said, he did a lot of good things, but he destroyed France. Okay. Here's what Will Durant had to say about religion. The philosophes don't need religion, but the average man wants it. Religion tells him that his life is meaningful. The atheism of the philosophers leads to despair for the average man. Okay. How's the average poor guy going to feel? He's out scratching the dirt every day trying to grow some food. And he's told that there is no God and that he's basically just, going to work like a farm animal owned by his ruler. Okay. By the way, Mozart, the great pianist composer, he hated Voltaire. Here's what Mozart said about Voltaire when Voltaire died: "That ungodly villain Voltaire has died miserably, just like a beast. That is his reward." Yeah, and okay, Voltaire wised up a little bit when he was much older, like around 80 years of age. He said, a philosopher can live without heaven and hell, but most people are not philosophers. If God did not exist, we would have to invent him. I want my doctor and my tailor to believe in God so they don't rob me. The people are most empowered by education. Yep, that's true. That's why the education system is so bad. They don't want people educated. All right, now we come to Schopenhauer. We're most of the way done here, but I'm sort of giving you some highlights of the philosophers included in the book. There's tons of great philosophers that weren't included in the book, but he did include a couple great ones. Schopenhauer is another crazy genius. He never married, never had any children. He's kind of sad, grouchy, and lonely. But the guy was a great genius. And he was helpful to me for learning how to write better. And in a sense, he was a more logical, thought out, explained version of Soren Kierkegaard. Okay, well, first of all, here's a quote by Arthur Schopenhauer: "The apex of life is reproduction, having children, and then raising those young children. It's all downhill after that." Religion is the metaphysics for the masses. And I think that's a good point, too. Regular people, they're not going to read a book. They're not going to figure all this stuff out and develop their own, philosophy. They need a societal system that they can work with that's already established for them. Okay, Schopenhauer on writing. Okay, he could read like in 5 different languages or 6 different languages, and he just did tons of reading. He had enough money and wealth that he could just study all the time. He would read and study every morning, write for his books, and then he would do some other things in the afternoon. He'd walk a lot, get his exercise, go to a play, etc. Okay, a happy life is impossible. The highest a man can achieve is a heroic life. And I think that's a great quote. Basically, you get busy doing whatever is the right thing for you to be doing, and you're going to be a lot happier. It is only in old age that intellectual men attain their sublime expression. Yeah, it takes a long time to have good judgment. Okay, I didn't realize that conventional medicine was mostly fake until, gosh, I was in my mid 30s, okay, my late 30s. And then it took me a long time to figure out what was real. And that happens, I think, all doctors if they ever wake up and start to figure things out. Of all the intellectual faculties, judgment is the last to mature. Yeah, that's why a lot of these old guys, take a look at the great nutrition doctors, McDougall, Esselstyn, T. Colin Campbell, Doug Lisle. They're all old guys, okay? They're not young people. No young person. Young people think nutrition's a joke. When you're 20 years old and you're all strong and muscular, you think, all this stuff about vegan diet. Who needs that? Okay, Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer was great on learning how to write. There's a great book I read all about Schopenhauer's philosophy of art and literature. It was a masterpiece of a book. Okay, a man who has not enough originality to think out a new title for a book will be much less capable of giving it new contents. True brevity consists in saying only that which is worth saying, while avoiding all that everyone else can think of for themselves. Okay, yeah, he's magnificent on the subject of how does a man structure himself to focus on doing something that is truly great. Not just BS, not just clickbait, but something that is excellent. And so I really found that really helpful, and I really like that in him. That's why I think he's a great philosopher. The great writer writes the quintessence only, nothing that the reader would think of for themselves. To use many words, to communicate few thoughts, is the unmistakable sign of mediocrity. To gather much thought into a few words, that is what stamps the man of genius. That's why whenever I write, I always try to make it as concise as possible. Like if I send an email, I want it as concise as possible. Because I'm trying to, in my mind's eye, do what Schopenhauer said, and I think he's right. The task is to think what nobody yet has thought about that which everybody sees. Only he who writes entirely for the sake of what he has to say writes anything worth writing. The greatest works of the greatest men, they all belong to a time when the author had to write them for nothing or for a very small amount. The best writers are those who have thought before they started writing, and they are rare. He who writes for fools will always have a large audience. It only takes a few pages to see the author's skill and intention. If the author does not quickly display some valuable information and only seems to be writing to fill up the page with words, then quickly throw the book into the garbage because your time is too valuable to waste. A great writer writes because he has something to say. He does not write for fame or money because he knows he will not get any. He writes for great men and for posterity because too few of his contemporaries will be able to follow his thoughts. He is like a man who knows the correct time, but it is of no use to him because everyone else is using a different clock. He plans his book like an architect plans a building. He has really thought about the topic. He has conversed about the topic. He writes about his own thoughts and his own experience. He expresses in a fresh and forcible way. Simplicity has always been held to be a mark of truth. It is also a mark of genius. The object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and it is not to go on counting up facts ad infinitum. Since similes and metaphors are such a powerful engine of knowledge, it is a sign of great intelligence in a writer if his similes are unusual and at the same time to the point. A good work is doubly good if it is short. So yeah, I studied all this Schopenhauer stuff when I was trying to write my books. It really helped me to structure my philosophy of what I was trying to accomplish. And I thought Schopenhauer was great. He was my most influential person for helping me to write better. There's been a lot, I've read tons and tons of stuff on writing, but Schopenhauer really sort of helped me say, okay, you want to write something the best you can do and to make it stand up and hold up to posterity, to be valuable to people. Okay, let's see. Students and learned persons of all sorts and every age aim as a rule at acquiring information rather than insight. Information is only a means of insight and is of little value in and of itself. True excellence can be attained only where the work has been produced for its own sake alone. The truth is that a hobbyist treats his subject as an end, whereas a professional treats it merely as a means. The hobbyist is really in earnest about a matter and has a direct interest because he likes it. He pursues it con amore. It is these hobbyists and not the professional hirelings that have always done the greatest work. And that's the truth too. You want to read a great medical book, read, McDougall's Start Solution, read my nutrition books, okay? You'll see every effort was made to try to make the book good and helpful. And then, by comparison, pick up some of these nutrition textbooks that come out of universities. They all stink. Every single one of them stinks, okay? Don't get me wrong. There's some that are better than others, okay? But none of them has a personal, coherent feel and sort of guide you through it step by step what the reader needs to know. And wait till you start reading the biochemistry books. All the university biochemistry books, they all stink. They're all like worthless. They're just designed to help somebody eventually learn how to sell drugs. They don't teach you what you want to know. The intellectual attainments of a man who thinks for himself, they resemble a fine painting where the light and shade are correct, the tones sustained, the color perfectly harmonized. It is true to life. On the other hand, the work of an intellectual, the attainments of a mere man of learning, like a college professor, they're like a large palette full of all sorts of colors, which are at best, systematically arranged, but they're devoid of harmony, connection, or meaning. To think with one's own head is to aim at developing a coherent whole, a system, even though it is not strictly a complete one or not yet. The really scientific thinker, although he has need of much knowledge, and so he must read a great deal, his mind is strong enough to master it all and to assimilate it and incorporate it with his own system of thoughts and to make it fit with the organic unity of insight, of his insight, which is, although vast, is always growing. The thinker stands in the same relation to the book philosopher as an eyewitness does to the historian. He speaks from direct knowledge of his own. The thinker is like the man who has traveled to another place and lived there for some time, whereas the book scholar is one who has only read travel guides about it. The man who thinks for himself can easily be distinguished from the book philosopher by the way he talks, by his marked earnestness and the originality, directness, and personal conviction that stamp all of his thoughts and his expressions. The book philosopher lets it be seen that everything he has is secondhand. The works of all truly capable minds are distinguished by a character of decision and definiteness, which means they are clear. A truly capable mind knows exactly what it wants to express. The characteristic sign of a mind of the highest order is that it always judges at first hand. Okay, so that's great advice for a writer. It's fantastic. It's about as well expressed as writing ever was about how to write. Okay, so here's more of Arthur Schopenhauer. I'm not going to go into all of it to make this video too long. If you want, you can watch my other video on Schopenhauer, but he was a great genius for advice on how to writing. Okay, and I'll just tell you one more quote of Schopenhauer by writing because it's a fantastic one. Good writing should be guided by the rule that a man can think of only one thing at a time. Therefore, good writing should be guided by this rule that you shouldn't put two big thoughts into one sentence unless you're comparing them, okay? So that's why you got to break up your sentences so the author can learn and focus on one thing at a time. Okay, then Schopenhauer talks a lot about what is genius and how a genius must behave and think. And, I was trying to become a genius, so I read all of his stuff pretty carefully, and his advice was great. Okay, gosh, I went on and on about Schopenhauer. I love Schopenhauer. I learned so much from Schopenhauer. It's not even funny. Yeah, he's kind of a crazy, lonely, old, pathetic guy, but man, was he a genius too. Okay, so he goes on and on. All right, I'm not going to quote you anymore, Schopenhauer. I'll leave that to you. Okay, I'll just introduce you to George Santayana. He was sort of a Spanish aristocrat, Catholic, and he ended up in the United States. And okay, the family is one of nature's masterpieces. Yeah, the traditional Western family is a great thing. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And Western civilization is a great thing. And people say, yeah, we're losing from society. You're losing Western civilization, okay? And you don't understand how great it is. It's the greatest civilization that ever existed on the planet. No one else has its legacy of literature, has its legacy of art and music and architecture. They just don't, okay? It's just a fact. And that's an important point to realize is, you have to speak up for your civilization or you will lose it, okay? You're going to be pushed down like a farm animal. Okay, George Santayana. Okay, the family is one of nature's masterpieces. Skepticism is the chastity of the intellect, and it is shameful to surrender too soon to the first comer. Here's one of my favorite quotes by Santayana. Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. No, the next one's the one I like better. The Roman Catholic Church has much in common with Greek paganism. Christianity arose out of Greek theology and the Old Testament's morality. Greek theology predominated in Catholicism. The Catholic Church has much in common with Greek paganism. The Old Testament morality predominated in Protestantism. The Catholics had a Renaissance. The Protestants had a Reformation. Yeah, there's a lot of truth in those words. Here's a nice quote by Hannah Arendt. She said, the discoverer of the role of forgiveness in human affairs was Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Okay? All right, now this is the last slide. Okay, so this is Jesus Christ, Sermon on the Mount. And this is the painting by Carl Bloch from 1877. And here's some quotes by Will Durant. Caesar and Christ had met in the arena, and Christ won. This is Will Durant speaking. My final lesson of history is the same as Jesus Christ. We should try to love one another.